On December 12, 1935, Heinrich Himmler, one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany and head of the SS, signed a document that would forever alter the lives of tens of thousands of children. This document established an organization called Lebensborn, which translates to Fountain of Life or Wellspring of Life. The name evoked images of purity, renewal, and growth. Behind this seemingly benign title, however, lay one of the most chilling social experiments of the Third Reich. The Lebensborn program represented the Nazi regime's attempt to engineer a superior race through selective breeding, strict genetic screening, and eventually the systematic kidnapping of children from occupied territories. While many aspects of Nazi atrocities have been extensively documented and remembered, the Lebensborn program remains one of the lesser-known chapters of the Second World War. Yet its impact on the lives it touched was profound and permanent, leaving scars that would last generations. This is the story of the children born into or stolen for this program. It is a story of how ideology can transform human beings into instruments of policy, how children became pawns in a grand racial vision, and how the consequences of such programs echo across decades, shaping identities, families, and collective memory. To understand the Lebensborn program, one must first understand the ideology that birthed it. The Nazi worldview rested on a foundation of racial hierarchy and pseudo-scientific theories about human genetics. At its core was the belief in the superiority of the so-called Aryan race, a mythical category of Nordic peoples characterized by fair skin, light hair, and blue eyes. This obsession with racial purity did not emerge from nowhere. It built upon decades of eugenics movements that had gained traction across Europe and North America during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These movements advocated for selective breeding in human populations, claiming that society could be improved by encouraging reproduction among those deemed genetically superior, while preventing reproduction among those considered inferior. In Germany, these ideas merged with extreme nationalism and anti-Semitism to create a toxic ideology that would define the Nazi state. Adolf Hitler and his inner circle believed that Germany's strength depended on the purity and size of its population. They viewed life itself as a racial struggle in which only the strongest and most pure would survive and dominate. By the early 1930s, Germany's birth rate had been declining for decades. This demographic trend alarmed Nazi leaders, who dreamed of expanding German territory eastward across Europe. Their vision of Lebensraum, or living space, required not just military conquest, but also millions of German settlers to colonize conquered lands. The existing population, they concluded, was insufficient for their imperial ambitions. The Nazi response to this perceived crisis took two parallel forms. The regime implemented aggressive pro-natalist policies to encourage births among those they deemed racially valuable. Simultaneously, they pursued policies of sterilization, segregation, and eventual elimination of those they classified as racially or genetically undesirable. This included Jews, Roma people, Slavic populations, individuals with disabilities, and many others. The Lebensborn program emerged from this context as a cornerstone of the Nazi attempt to increase the Aryan population and, ultimately, to shape the genetic future of their envisioned empire. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Lebensborn program, occupied a unique position in the Nazi hierarchy. As Reichsführer SS, he commanded not only the elite paramilitary organization, but also held enormous influence over racial policy. Himmler was a true believer in the Nazi racial ideology, and he approached the question of demographic growth with the same systematic ruthlessness he applied to other SS operations. Himmler viewed the men of the SS as the biological and racial elite of Germany. He believed they possessed not only superior physical attributes, but also superior character traits, such as loyalty, courage, and leadership ability, which he thought were hereditary and could be passed to offspring. To him, every SS man had a duty to contribute to the genetic future of the Reich by fathering as many children as possible. In his writings and speeches, Himmler frequently expressed concern about the loss of German soldiers in war. Each fallen soldier, he argued, represented not just an individual tragedy, but the loss of all the future children that man might have fathered. This demographic thinking led him to conclude that extraordinary measures were necessary to maximize births among the racially elite. The Lebensborn program, officially titled Registered Society Lebensborn, was established as an SS organization with specific goals. Initially, it aimed to provide financial support to SS families with multiple children, to reduce abortions among unmarried women of Aryan descent, and to facilitate the adoption of children born to such women into suitable families. Himmler himself took a personal interest in the program, overseeing many of its aspects and periodically inspecting the facilities. He encouraged SS men to marry early and to have at least 4 children, regardless of marital status. This represented a radical departure from traditional German social values, which stigmatized illegitimacy and unmarried motherhood. The genius, if such a dark endeavor can be called that, of Himmler's approach was to reframe unmarried motherhood as a patriotic duty. In a society that typically shamed unwed mothers, the Lebensborn program offered them an alternative narrative. They were not fallen women, but contributors to the racial future of Germany. Their children were not illegitimate, but valuable additions to the Aryan bloodline. The Lebensborn program established a network of maternity homes throughout Germany and eventually across occupied territories. These were not ordinary hospitals or orphanages. They were carefully designed facilities intended to provide optimal conditions for pregnancy, birth, and early childhood development according to Nazi racial principles. Entrance into the program was highly selective. Women who wished to give birth at a Lebensborn home had to undergo rigorous screening. Medical examinations verified their physical health and absence of any hereditary diseases or disabilities. Even more critically, they had to prove their Aryan ancestry, typically going back 3 generations. Officials examined family trees, photographs, and physical characteristics. Only approximately 40% of applicants were accepted into the program. The same stringent criteria applied to men. SS officers had to obtain permission to marry, and both they and their prospective brides underwent examinations to establish racial purity. The children conceived through the program, whether within or outside of marriage, were expected to represent the finest specimens of the Aryan race. Once accepted, pregnant women could choose to give birth at a Lebensborn home far from their communities, shielding them from the social judgment that typically accompanied unwed pregnancy. The homes offered comfortable accommodations, good nutrition, and attentive medical care. Everything was designed to ensure the health of both mother and child. However, the care came with strings attached. After birth, mothers faced a choice, though it was often a coercive one. They could keep their children and raise them, or they could relinquish them for adoption to carefully selected families, usually connected to the SS. Many women, particularly unmarried mothers with limited economic prospects, chose adoption. Others found that, even if they wished to keep their children, social and economic pressures made it impossible. The children placed for adoption entered a system designed to match them with ideologically suitable parents. SS families were given preference, ensuring that the children would be raised in homes steeped in Nazi values. The adoptive parents often knew little about the biological parents, and records were kept secret. This secrecy would later create enormous difficulties for children trying to understand their origins. From the program's inception in 1935 until the end of the war in 1945, the records show that at least 8,000 children were born in Lebensborn homes within Germany. But this was only the beginning. As the war expanded German control across Europe, so too did the Lebensborn program, taking on increasingly sinister dimensions. The Lebensborn homes were designed to embody Nazi ideals of cleanliness, order, and racial purity. Facilities were modern and well-maintained, with gardens, sunlight-filled rooms, and dedicated nursing staff. In a time of increasing wartime shortages, these homes remained remarkably well supplied. Even as ordinary Germans faced rationing and hunger, Lebensborn facilities received priority allocation of food, medicine, and other necessities. Daily routines in the homes followed strict schedules. Infants received meticulous care, including 2 baths daily, regular medical examinations, and carefully monitored feeding schedules. Everything that came into contact with the babies was disinfected. The children spent time outdoors in the sunlight, which staff believed contributed to their health and vigor. Nurses ensured that children ate everything provided to them. For the mothers staying at the homes, life was relatively comfortable but highly controlled. They received good medical care throughout their pregnancies and after delivery. The homes attempted to create an atmosphere that was half hospital, half resort, part ideological training center. Staff organized activities and lectures promoting Nazi ideology and proper child rearing according to racial principles. Yet beneath this veneer of care lay a cold transactional reality. The children were not primarily seen as individuals, but as genetic material, as future soldiers and mothers for the Reich. Medical staff carefully measured and documented every physical characteristic, creating detailed records that tracked the children's racial features and development. Survivors of the program later described growing up with a profound sense that something was wrong, even if they could not articulate it. Children raised in Lebensborn homes or adopted through the program often received little genuine affection or individual attention. The emphasis on collective care over maternal bonding, on racial characteristics over personality, created an emotional void. Some former Lebensborn children reported developmental issues, particularly difficulties forming attachments and relating to others emotionally. The lack of consistent parental figures during critical early years had lasting psychological effects. Many struggled with questions of identity, never fully knowing where they came from or who their biological parents were. As German forces swept across Europe between 1939 and 1941, conquering Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and pushing deep into the Soviet Union, the Lebensborn program expanded dramatically. Homes were established in occupied territories, including 9 facilities in Norway, 2 in Austria, and 1 each in Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Luxembourg, and Denmark. In these occupied countries, the program took on a new dimension. German soldiers and SS officers stationed abroad formed relationships with local women. Some of these relationships were consensual, others were coercive. When pregnancies resulted, the Lebensborn program offered a solution that served Nazi ideology. If the mother could prove she met racial criteria, she could give birth at a Lebensborn home and the child could be raised as German. This was particularly significant in Norway, where the program was most active outside of Germany. Approximately 8,000 to 12,000 children were born to Norwegian mothers and German fathers during the occupation. Many of these women faced impossible choices. Some genuinely cared for the fathers of their children. Others had been subjected to coercive abuse by occupying forces. When the program offered them a way to give birth discreetly and ensure their children would be cared for, many felt they had little choice but to accept. But the most disturbing aspect of the program's wartime expansion was the systematic kidnapping of children from occupied territories. This element of Lebensborn transformed it from a morally questionable breeding program into a crime against humanity. The kidnapping program began with a cold calculation. Himmler reportedly stated, "It is our duty to take the children with us to remove them from their environment. Either we win over any good blood that we can use for ourselves and give it a place in our people, or we destroy this blood." SS units, particularly in Poland and the occupied Soviet territories, began seizing children they deemed racially valuable. The criteria was simple and brutal: fair hair, light-colored eyes, symmetrical features, and healthy physical condition. Children were taken from their families in full view of their parents, from orphanages, from streets, and from schools. These kidnapped children underwent a selection process. Those deemed sufficiently Aryan were sent to Lebensborn centers or similar facilities for Germanization. This process aimed to erase their original identities completely. Children were given German names, forbidden to speak their native languages, and told that their parents had abandoned them or that they were German children who had been taken by inferior peoples. Staff used various techniques of psychological manipulation and, when that failed, physical punishment. Children who resisted, who cried for their parents, who refused to learn German or accept their new identities, faced harsh discipline. Some were sent to youth labor camps. Others simply disappeared, likely ending up in concentration camps where they perished. The exact numbers of kidnapped children remain uncertain because SS members destroyed most records as Allied forces approached. Estimates vary widely. Polish government sources claimed at least 10,000 children were kidnapped from Poland alone, though some estimates suggest the number could be as high as 100,000 across all occupied territories. More conservative scholarly estimates place the total around 20,000 documented cases. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in 1942, following the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, a high-ranking SS officer in Prague. In retaliation, SS units destroyed the Czech village of Lidice, executing all adult men and deporting women and children. The children who met racial criteria were sent for Germanization. Those who did not were sent to their deaths.
The true cost of the Lebensborn program can only be understood through the voices of those who lived through it. In the decades since the war, many Lebensborn children have come forward to tell their stories, each one revealing the profound impact of being instrumentalized by Nazi ideology. Gisela Heidenreich, born in 1942 in a Lebensborn home in Bavaria, discovered her origins only as an adult. Her mother had been an unmarried woman who gave birth in the program and chose to keep her daughter. Heidenreich described growing up with a sense of being different, of not quite belonging. When she finally learned the truth about her birth, she struggled to reconcile her identity with the purpose for which she was conceived. For children like Heidenreich, born in the homes to willing participants, the psychological burden was complicated. They were neither victims of kidnapping nor perpetrators of crimes, yet they carried the weight of having been conceived as part of a genocidal ideology. Many reported feeling tainted by association, struggling with guilt over something they had no control over. The kidnapped children faced even more profound trauma. Many grew up in German families, raised as Germans, only to discover later that they had been stolen from their original families. Some rejected this truth entirely, having been so thoroughly convinced of their German identity that they could not accept their true heritage. Others spent decades searching for their origins. Without proper documentation and with records destroyed, many never found answers. They lived in a state of permanent uncertainty, knowing they had been taken but unable to discover from where or from whom. In Norway, the children of German fathers and Norwegian mothers faced particular persecution after the war. Norwegian society, seeking to punish collaboration with the occupiers, turned its anger on these innocent children. They were subjected to bullying, discrimination, and social exclusion. Some were institutionalized. The Norwegian government even attempted to deport these children to Germany, Australia, and Brazil, though international pressure prevented this. Paul Hansen, born in Norway to a Norwegian mother and German father, described decades of shame and silence. He and others like him were called German children as a slur. They struggled to find their place in a society that saw them as reminders of occupation and betrayal. Many carried this stigma throughout their lives, never speaking openly about their origins. The psychological impact extended beyond identity confusion and social rejection. Many Lebensborn children reported difficulties with trust, attachment, and relationships. Growing up knowing they had been conceived or selected for ideological purposes, that they had been valued not as individuals but as genetic material, left deep emotional scars.
When Allied forces liberated Europe in 1945, they found the remnants of the Lebensborn program scattered across the continent. The maternity homes were discovered, some still operating until the final days of the war. In these facilities, children continued to receive excellent care, even as the world around them collapsed into chaos. In the immediate aftermath of the war, approximately 10,000 children were located in facilities connected to the Lebensborn program in the American-controlled zones of Germany alone. The task of identifying these children and returning them to their families proved enormously complex. In 1947, American occupation authorities brought the leaders of the Lebensborn organization to trial as part of the broader Nuremberg proceedings. The trial, officially titled United States of America v. Ulrich Kreifeld et al., included charges related to the kidnapping of foreign children. The prosecution presented evidence of a systematic program to seize racially suitable children from occupied territories. Witnesses testified about children torn from their parents, about the psychological techniques used to Germanize them, about the cold bureaucracy that classified children as acceptable or unacceptable for German society. The defense argued that Lebensborn itself was primarily a welfare organization for mothers and children, and that any kidnapping activities were carried out by other organizations, not by Lebensborn staff. They claimed that only a small percentage of the children who passed through Lebensborn facilities had been kidnapped. The court's judgment reflected this complexity. While acknowledging ample evidence of a widespread kidnapping program in northeastern Europe, the judges concluded that the prosecution had not proven with sufficient certainty that Lebensborn as an organization was primarily responsible for these kidnappings. Most defendants received relatively light sentences or were acquitted. This verdict was controversial and remains so among historians. Critics argued that it allowed perpetrators to escape justice and sent a message that the crime of separating children from their families, while serious, was not among the gravest Nazi offenses. The focus of post-war justice on the death camps and the Holocaust of European Jewry, while absolutely necessary, meant that other crimes received less attention. The process of reuniting kidnapped children with their families faced immense challenges. Many families had been destroyed in the war. Parents who might have claimed children were dead. In Poland alone, it is estimated that only 15 to 25% of kidnapped children were successfully returned to their biological families. Some German adoptive families refused to return children they had raised, claiming them as their own. In other cases, children themselves resisted return, having been successfully convinced of their German identity and having no memory of their original families. Courts struggled with these cases, balancing the rights of biological parents against the psychological welfare of children who had bonded with adoptive parents.
The Lebensborn program left a legacy that extended far beyond the immediate post-war period.
For decades, its existence remained relatively obscure, overshadowed by other Nazi crimes. The children of the program often grew up in silence, either not knowing their origins or choosing not to speak about them. In Germany, Lebensborn children faced stigma and discrimination. Some discovered their origins only when they needed birth certificates for marriage or other official purposes. The revelation could be devastating, forcing them to confront the circumstances of their conception and the ideology behind their birth. The program also left a legacy of misinformation and myth. Rumors circulated about Lebensborn homes being breeding facilities where SS men and selected women were paired for procreation. While the program did encourage relationships between SS men and racially suitable women, the reality was more bureaucratic and less sensational than the myth suggested. These misunderstandings persisted for decades, further complicating the experiences of Lebensborn children, who had to contend both with the truth and with public misconceptions. In recent decades, historians and journalists have worked to document the program more thoroughly. Researcher Dorothea Smits-Koester spent years interviewing Lebensborn children and collecting documents, creating an archive that she recently donated to the Arlsen Archives to ensure this history is preserved. Her work and that of others has helped bring this chapter of history out of the shadows. For many Lebensborn children, now in their 70s and 80s, this increased attention has been both painful and necessary. Some have chosen to speak publicly about their experiences, hoping that their stories will serve as warnings about the dangers of racial ideology and the instrumentalization of children for political purposes. The Norwegian government officially apologized to the war children in 2000, acknowledging the injustice of their treatment. This was an important step toward recognition and healing, though it came too late for many who had already lived their entire lives bearing the stigma. The question of identity remains central to the Lebensborn legacy. Many children still struggle with fundamental questions about who they are. For those who were kidnapped, the loss of cultural heritage, language, and family connection represents a wound that can never fully heal. They were robbed not just of their childhood, but of their very identity. The program also raises difficult questions about genetic determinism and the nature of identity. The Nazis believed that racial characteristics and character traits were hereditary and could be cultivated through selective breeding. The reality, of course, is that human beings are shaped by complex interactions of genetics, environment, culture, and individual experience. The Lebensborn children, whatever their genetic background, became products of their unique circumstances, disproving Nazi racial theories through their very diversity of outcomes and experiences. The Lebensborn program stands as one of the clearest examples of how ideology can distort the value of human life. It shows how a government, claiming to act for national strength and renewal, reduced children to instruments of racial policy and future conquest. The program's survivors carried the consequences not only during the war, but throughout their entire lives, often struggling to understand who they were and where they came from. Though its facilities closed and its leaders faded into history, the legacy of Lebensborn endures in the lives of those who were shaped by it, and in the reminder that human identity must never again be defined or controlled by the demands of power or ideology. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.